Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
And welcome in, everybody. It is the Tuesday night hustle. Just kidding. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. We changed the name. The guests remain the same, though, because, boy, do we have a great show in store for you guys tonight. Welcome in to the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined, as always, by my main man, the analytical assassin, Dwain McFarland. Dwain, how you doing down there, my friend?
Man, I'm excited, Drake. It's draft week. Can you believe it's here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so sick of turning on every show and hearing about the same five guys and where they're going to go. Like, that's why tonight's going to be great. Our guest is Matt Waldman, author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. If you play fantasy football, specifically Dynasty leagues, you have to have the RSP. You have to go to mattwaldmanrsp.com because it is the blueprint to fantasy Dynasty success. I say that not only as someone who is a new Facebook friend of Mr. Waldman, but also as a subscriber buying this for multiple years. Matt, welcome to the show. How are things going down there in Georgia?
They're doing well, considering that I guess our governor decided to open everything up. So
yeah, you guys are
I'll
full
still
speed
be
ahead.
here. It's full speed ahead. I'll be hitting the brakes here at home for a good long while, and I'm glad to be here. And yeah, we're Facebook friends. I think we'll be talking more on Twitter though, because I'm really on Facebook.
Yeah,
but it should be fun. I appreciate you guys having me on. And look at this, like the digs you got going on here, and that opener.
Yeah,
that opener
really
was awesome, man.
Shout out to my old fraternity brother, Jeremy Caro, who works for SNY, which, if you guys aren't in the Northeast, the Mets own that station. That's who plays the Mets games here in New York. And without any baseball, he has nothing to do. So a producer from the the Mets said, "Hey, I'll make this for you." And shout out to 5 Yard Lee, our guy from the 5 Yard Rush podcast over in the UK that makes these overlays for us. If you're watching us on YouTube, and hopefully you all are, head over to our YouTube channel. It is the Fantasy Football Hustle podcast. Just type it all in and you'll find us there. Please subscribe, help us grow those numbers. And if you're listening on iTunes, give us a 5-star review. Tell us you love us, and maybe we'll have some good things coming your way come draft season, like we did last year. Hint, hint. So let's get rocking and rolling here, guys. Dwain, it's draft week. We're ready for just all Eagles wide receiver talk for the next hour with Waldman here. But I'll let you start things off. You work over at mattwaldmanrsp.com doing a podcast with Jay Moyer. I always screw it up, so let's try again. The data and film and data analytics. I can't get it right.
Yes, the Film and Data Fantasy Podcast.
There it is.
RSP in front of it. Yeah, you caught me off guard. I'm like, man, we haven't recorded that in about 3 months, so we'll be doing it again when football season gets here. But yeah, I'm super excited to have Matt on. Plenty of people to talk about. The thing I love about getting the RSP, and I've been reading it for over 10 years. So, and I'll take it a step further than Drake. It's not just if you're a fantasy or a dynasty. If you just like football, period, like just reading the RSP just makes you a smarter person. Matt, what I love about it, and I want to get into some of this tonight as we talk about these players, just so people can get a better feel for what you do. But I just love the process. You're a guy that, you come from a background where you understand what it means, to have rigor and have processes in place and to look at things from a consistent view and really put all those things together and come up with a way of thinking about all these players at these different positions that we'll talk about tonight. But what I love is that every year, like, you're just kind of tweaking this thing. And so as soon as I get the RSP, like, one of the first things I go scrolling through, and I've sent Matt screenshots before. I'm like, oh, I love this new thing. Like last year, some of the stuff he was doing with the quarterback accuracy, but Matt's constantly improving this stuff. So I'm super excited about jumping into some of these players tonight. And Drake, I don't know where you want to start. I'm guessing that we're starting with quarterbacks. We can't start with the Eagles right out of the gate because you'll just get you'll get way too excited, dude.
It's 1,194 pages that, as according to what I had open here, and there is a lot of info. I wanted to do this. This is the year of the wide receiver. Okay, so everyone's talking about, you got Jerry Jeudy, you've got CeeDee Lamb, then you fall a little farther down, and everyone's real high, except maybe we'll find out Matt about Rager and Mims is a big a riser now. So in Dynasty football, everyone loves the wide receiver. You can get a lot of years out of them, more so than a running back. So let's start there. If guys are getting ready, Matt, in their wide receiver needy Dynasty teams, and they're, in the middle of the first round, and they're like, all right, we got to find out who Waldman likes here. Your number one wide receiver was CeeDee Lamb. He's a guy that's been pegged to the Raiders a lot. Let's talk about CeeDee Lamb, and Dwain, you can interject too with the Raiders and what is his fit and what kind of teams would really benefit from what he does best?
That's a great question. And, I just have to comment, Brian, just, joking, kind of joking here, but you've got a partner who's a Cowboys fan, and you're like tempting him with all this Eagles stuff. And now you bring like a guy who's like a closeted Ravens fan and Browns fan on with all this like Steeler colors going on.
These are actually my high school colors also. So
I see. Because
I won't tell Dwain that I reached out to a big time Eagles podcast about advertising our show on there, but we'll get to that later.
Okay. So CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb. Okay. So the thing about him is that he's probably the most
good for the Eagles. That's all I'm going to say. And then now Matt can go. Sorry.
Yeah. He's a solid, he's probably one of those guys that when you think about the top of this class, he's probably the most versatile of the top 4 to 5 receivers in this group. So, when you think about it from that perspective, it's a fairly even group of players in terms of their overall grades, if you ask me. And what differentiates them is maybe 1 to 2 things. And when you look at Lamb, he can play flanker. So he's that type of guy that can be outside, but maybe a couple yards off the line of scrimmage. And you can use him really well when he catches the ball in open space because he's great after the catch. He'll make the first, second, and sometimes third man miss. He's a rugged player who can go over the middle and take contact. If you need him, on the boundary, he's an absolutely, I think he's arguably as good of a route runner as Jerry Jeudy, maybe even a little better in some areas. Jerry Jeudy a lot of times is like the fan favorite because when you watch him play, he stacks moves upon moves, and you can do that in college football. You can do that in all-star games like Andy Isabella did, and it's going to impress a lot of NFL writers, but it's not going to keep the guy on the field. It's not going to earn him playing time when he's, when a patient cornerback, which patient cornerback is pretty much the description for an NFL cornerback. When you have a patient cornerback who can just kind of wait you out, you have to be efficient. You have to be really skilled at the type of moves you're going to use. You can't just throw everything at a guy and see if it works. And Jerry Jeudy, while a very good player, he can get stopped a little bit by more patient corners, whereas CeeDee Lamb is a very patient receiver in his own right, but also a guy who can do it, get open with more efficiency than I think Jerry Jeudy sometimes does. And again, we're splitting hairs here. But excellent player. Think about him with the Raiders. You can use him in the slot. You can use him at flanker. And if you had to, especially in the play action game, because he's fast enough and wins the ball above the rim very well, you could use him as a split end. But with Tyrell Williams kind of on the outside, you've got that Clemson kid, from last year who was the rookie who's in the slot. You can kind of switch switch Lamb from slot to flanker. And I think that's why they like him, is that they can match him up in a number of different ways, kind of in the way that they ideally wanted to use Amari Cooper in the past, but it just didn't quite work out. So, to me, CeeDee Lamb is a nice fit for the Raiders, and he's probably a nice fit for pretty much any team that would want to grab him because of the fact that he's so versatile.
I was kind of surprised, Dwain. I don't know if you've seen a lot of this kid down in Texas, but Denzel Mims comes in on your board as your number 2 wide receiver. He's kind of a guy that's maybe some think in many mock drafts is a back of the first round, early second round type receiver. And you have him all the way up here at number 2, ahead of Jeudy, ahead of Jefferson and Ruggs, who I'm sure we'll talk about. So that's got to surprise a lot of your readers. What really elevated him to the top of your polls? And let's explain to everybody also, you say numerous times in the RSP that you hate rankings. It's all about tiers and knowing how guys fit into systems. And that's so key to understand. But you've got this guy up at number 2.
Yeah. And, again, that's why I hate rankings, because it's like you look at it and I'd say, his grade his grade, his depth of talent grade is 88.7. Now, anyone who's listening to that and doesn't understand what I'm talking about, if you've never read the RSP, it doesn't really matter to you. But if I explained a little bit more, depth of talent to me is really how good they are at specific types of skills that apply to what they do. So Denzel Mims may have certain skills that Jerry Jeudy doesn't, but if Jerry Jeudy had a little more depth of talent, even though he may have fewer skills that you would look at for the wide receiver position, if he does them better, he might actually be high, might have been ranked higher than Mims. But the difference between Mims and Jeudy on in my grading is less than a point. It's barely even a half a point. So there's not much of a difference between those two. There's not much of a difference between Denzel Mims really and Justin Jefferson. They're not even a point different from each other. So they're all in the same tier. They're in my second tier. I have one first tier player, that's CeeDee Lamb. I also have, I don't know, 9 second tier players, beginning with Mims and ending with Jalen Reagor or Rager. So, or excuse me, not Rager, Michael Pittman. And that's so when you look at Michael Pittman and the range of Mims to Michael Pittman, there's actually a good 7 or 8 players in that tier, and they're all not very far away in terms of their separation. So it's the difference between one or two things, like does one guy get off the line better than the other against press? Does one guy offer a wider range of skills after the catch or with his route running compared to the next? Those types of things that are very small and separate, that may be a small number of points separating them, but it may be a huge difference between whether you want him playing for, say, the New England Patriots or want him playing for the Tennessee Titans. There's very different skill sets there. So when you look at Mims, he's my number 2, basically because in addition to that depth of talent, I also look at breadth of talent. And so my checklists and my evaluations aren't geared towards one team. If I was gearing it towards one team, my rankings might be dramatically different. And that's why receivers also have such great variation in their grades from NFL team to NFL team, because what they're looking for, whether it's a slot, a flanker, a split end, or a combination. A couple of years ago, the 49ers were like, we like Dante Pettis in the second round because he could play all 3 positions. What they didn't realize that they weren't going to like is that he wasn't willing to work on his game at the level he should have in the offseason to build on what he had. But the point being is that there were some teams that probably had him as a 3rd or 4th round pick. They had him as an early 2nd round pick, and it was based on the 3 positional needs that they were looking at. So with Mims, look, this is a guy who can release off the line of scrimmage extremely well. He plays split end. You could probably use him at flanker if you needed to. Goes up and wins the ball extremely well. He's really developed over the past 3 years, and he's been at the top of my board at this level probably for months now. Just because watching the 3 years worth of his work, the only real issue with his game that stands out is that he has some drops, and they're mostly focus-oriented drops. The technique's good. He takes hard contact and comes down with the ball. He'll go up and win it. He's as acrobatic as CeeDee Lamb is. And that's saying a lot because CeeDee Lamb is pretty darn acrobatic. Those two, actually Lamb and Mims, I would put up some of their best catches up against any NFL players that I've seen in the past 10, 15 years in terms of their catches. They'd be on that list in terms of the quality of acrobatic plays that they can make. So that's saying something in its own right. So, and he's a guy who's still kind of ascending upward in terms of his talent. So, when you put all that together, he was just slightly better in terms of that grade. But if you want to take, there's probably 3 or 4 guys that I wouldn't argue with you about in terms of Jeudy, Ruggs, or Jefferson, depending on the team that you have and what you're looking for. They might be better fits than Mims. But I'll say this, Mims can probably function in the role that almost all of the guys that are below him, what they can do, and he can do some of the other things that they can't. So it's, that's probably why he's number 2 right now.
Yeah, Matt, just a quick question on Mims. So it sounds like he's a guy, that you've been on for a while. I think he's been a late riser with a lot of people just because of his combine. Like if you just look at how freakish that was, a lot of people I think that may have kind of raised some eyebrows and people started to watch him more. But there is this one kind of thought, out in the industry that you really don't want a guy that has so many of his catches that are contested. And I know Mims was a guy that was really high and he did well in contested catches. I know you talk about some of his focus drops, but I've heard you talk a little bit about Mims, on some other podcasts, that I've been listening to, and just, tell our folks, what it is that you love about Mims, when you think about separation, and some of the things that when you're dealing with a defensive back at the NFL level. And also if you have any thoughts, on kind of that thought that, oh my gosh, if a guy has all these contested catches, that's actually a bad thing. And, maybe that needs to be a red flag from a draft standpoint.
It sounds nice when I hear that, that he has a lot of contested catches. So maybe that's something we should worry about. But I also think it's one of those deals where you go, okay, but who created the contested moment? Was it the receiver or the quarterback? And what are the instances where the receiver actually creates that contested moment? Is it because he's not fast enough and the ball's out there and the guy catches him? Or is it because he's being targeted on routes that are rhythm routes that are pinpoint, or deep throws where he has to slow down and wait for the football, or throws where he's coming back to the ball and these are situations where the quarterback, it's on the quarterback. And from what I've seen, I can't think of a lot of plays where the contested issue had to do with Mims, so it's kind of one of those situations where it's just funny. You could talk about Mims and all the contested catches he has, and then we can talk about Judy next and talk about all the contested catches he didn't have, or all the contested catches that Henry Ruggs didn't have, and they complain about that too. So it's like I look at this and
I think the idea is that it's becoming a game of separation, right? And if you can't create that separation, and I mean, when I watch Mims, and I haven't watched him near as much as you, but he is a player that I've watched more than some. To me, he's very aggressive. He's combative. To me, those are things that I would think would translate to the next level. A guy that when he faces stiffer competition still has a way to create separation, even though you may not be able to get, 2 or 3 yards, from your defender. The corners are going to be a lot better. So I don't know. I haven't seen any, data on it that would just make me think that it's one way or the other. But just when I'm watching it, like to me, it seems like a positive.
Yeah, that seems that way to me too. And when you watch him separate against defenders in terms of winning against press coverage, he does that very well. I mean, he uses his hands and feet extremely well. He's gotten better at it for the past 3 years. He doesn't have the greatest double move, but he can run by people. I've seen him do that multiple times. So I just look at to me, I looked at the quarterback situation, and it seemed to me that it was more about, how he's targeted, where he's targeted. And in a lot of those situations, they couldn't be anything but contested plays. So I'm not really too worried about that. And I think that this is just one of those deals where, I don't want to say people are looking for a reason to downgrade him, but again, when a guy has a good combine and they don't know who he is and they didn't hear about him until that time, then it's like, oh, he's a workout wonder. Let's find something. There's an agenda here in terms of for us to be able to nitpick him down a little bit in the media because we didn't know who he was, and whoever tells us who's supposed to be good or not, we didn't hear from them until now. Right. So let's talk about it that way. And to be fair, there are other people who've really been on Mims for a while. I mean, I think there are a lot of people in the draft community in the national sphere who've talked about him for months, but it's just one of those deals where he isn't as much of a known name, and we all want to explore all sides of the equation with a player. And I think that this is the side that, they've decided to take when it comes to how do we criticize him or potentially look at what the downfall could be.
Yeah. I have to jump in front of you here, Drake, because there's a guy I've been dying. I haven't even talked to Matt offline about this guy, but like, I really want to hear, your thoughts, Matt. And I think this is a guy that you've probably got graded higher than a lot of other folks. And I think, at least from what I hear, listening and reading what I've been able to read, a lot of folks seem to really label this guy as more of a gadget player. But, you did a really cool video on him on your RSP Boiler Room. So, folks, if you haven't checked that out, you can find it on YouTube. But Matt does all sorts of little videos on these guys throughout the year and just will highlight certain things about a player. And so the guy I just really wanted to hear about, you probably know where I'm going, but it's Laviska Shenault from Colorado. I keep hearing over and over, it's this gadget player. But then, I feel like when you really go, and you're the one that made me go watch him deeper after watching that video, there's really, he is great in space. He's great, when you just get the ball to him and let him do something, but he seems to have other elements, to his game. And I know you're careful about the way that you do these comparisons, so you can put any disclaimer here after I say this that you want. But when in your guide, it says Julio Jones dash X, which is where this player fits, dash Des Bryant, and it's for Laviska Shenault, like that gets me super excited.
And it should, because he's a good player, and I don't really get the hate for him other than the injuries. Like I get, the turf toe and the surgery and the shoulder, but then the guy toughs it out and runs a 4.58 in the 40 with a sports hernia. And I'm thinking, I bet I bet there's some speedsters out there that couldn't run a 4.58 with a sports hernia if we timed them in the middle of a season, or at the end of a season. And then he went and got surgery after that. So to me, everybody's like, well, the combine. And I'm thinking, but context, let's look at some context, folks. Can we please have some of that? Because he just ran an acceptable time. He ran an acceptable 40 for a wide receiver, barely on the edge of it, but did that with basically his guts ripped up. I mean, what exactly, how can you downgrade that? If anything, you upgrade that guy for that. But when you watch him on the field, I think one of the things that people miss is they don't see a lot of the different routes that you would like to see in the route tree. So it's not right there in front of their eyes. And the thing about evaluation is that when you're like and I used to do this, I understand, when I was playing fantasy and that's it, and I wasn't doing this, 16, 17, 18, 20 years ago, I'd watch these guys a month or two before the draft, and I'd watch some games if I had a chance to watch some of them, and I'd see them and I go, well, he doesn't run this route, he doesn't run this route, he doesn't run that route, and therefore he doesn't run the full route tree. He must not be all that good. He must be a little overrated, rather than going, well, what are the mechanics of the routes that he does run well, and how do those routes transfer to other routes? And when you watch him play, you realize that some of the harder routes he can run, some of the more difficult types of movements that translate to the routes that he doesn't run at Colorado, will translate to those types of plays. And he's very fluid. He comes back to the ball well, and he had a quarterback who, quite honestly, he's a one-read quarterback who if you blitz him hard enough or show enough blitz there, it derails him pretty much early on in the game, in every play that he can't find that first read. He has a heck of an arm, but that's about it. So you have a guy who's basically been beaten up, being used as a running back or a gadget player, but then on occasion you'll see these flashes of him as a route runner that translate very well to the NFL. I think most NFL teams are going to be smart enough to say, we have a wide receiver here. We don't have a guy that we're trying to kill by running him into the line of scrimmage. I remember Tavon Austin, and, Tavon Austin was probably the last mistake I've made about gadget players. And if I was wise enough, I would have heeded my first thought about him, which was he was a gadget player. And then I rationalized my way into thinking, oh, he could do more. Maybe he could eventually be a Victor Cruz, and he has this upside. And that was probably the last year that I started, that I did rankings where I had my checklist and then I did my rankings, as opposed to letting my checklist drive my rankings. And so let me tell you, Laviska Shenault is no Tavon Austin or oversized Tavon Austin. He's a legit wide receiver. And if he lands in a place like Green Bay, where they could really use his skills, or, he could be absolutely dynamite. And I think that he's only going to develop now because, Des Bryant ran a small number of routes compared to a lot of excellent wide receivers in the NFL. I think Chenault can already do what Des Bryant does as a route runner. Maybe not on the caliber of talent that, Bryant had at the top of his career, but he's already kind of at a baseline where I think he'll surpass Bryant one day if he can stay healthy. And from what I've seen, I mean, the injuries don't look like the worst injury is the toe. And I think people have been able to kind of work through that type of an injury in the past. The rest, I think, is just a matter, again, of him being asked to carry a really heavy load for a so-so team.
Joined by Matt Waldman, the author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. You can check that out over at mattwaldmanrsp.com. We're very thankful to have him on. Matt, you are now, if you watch Saturday Night Live, they give away jackets to, the guys who host the most and all that. You are now the guest who's been on our show more times than anyone else with 2 appearances. So,
well, cool. Well, thank you.
The funny thing, looking at wide receiver here, and we're talking about rookies here and going through the RSP, down at the bottom of the draft you can go middle of the draft, really, if you want to start at 19 with Vegas all the way through. There are good teams who need wide receivers. You go, Philadelphia needs one. New England could probably take one. New Orleans could use one to replace Sanders, whenever he's out of there. Minnesota definitely needs one. Seattle's always looking for somebody. So, man, there's going to be one of these guys. We talked Mims and Chenault who fall into good situations where they don't have to be the man and they have good quarterback play, which I think is going to help their fantasy prospects for this year and beyond. Before we move off receivers here, Matt, is there anything that bothers you about, fantasy Twitter and all these guys who are, scouts now and they're watching tape and they're putting out grades and this and that. And you're someone who's done this for many, many years. When you see all these scouting reports put out, is there something that people are just generally getting wrong? Or what advice would you give to some of those guys about their process?
I think, one, none of them really bother me because I'm glad that they're interested in the draft. That's nice. I mean, from that standpoint, but I'd say that if I were asked to give any advice as you did, it would just be to write your process down and make it transparent and make it as clear as possible. And the reason I say that is there are a lot of guys more intelligent than myself who are trying to evaluate players. But the problem is that there's dozens of things that you should be looking for at a position. And you're not going to be able to manage all of that in your head. You're not going to be able to maintain the way you define all that information in your head and not have a tremendous amount of variation from player to player in terms of how you grade them. You might get up one day and you had a couple more beers than you should have the night before, and you forget about something that you should have been keeping an eye on while you're watching them. You had you had a really good day, and now you see something and everything's kind of rosy for you, and and there's things that you're liking that really aren't all that good, and so it's about really defining clearly what it is you should be looking for and how you would score that. And you need to be pretty rigorous about that throughout your process. The reason I say that is that if you're really going to learn, you need to be able to see where what you are trying to capture, how that differs from what you're seeing on the field. And then that gives you that when they're different, that gives you a starting point to start thinking about what do I need to learn to be able to, make that gap smaller between what I see on the field and between how I'm scoring and observing it, and how important or less, what the priority of value that is, based on how you're scoring too. Because there's times that you can look at, if you're not defining it, you could place a lot more value on certain things that really don't matter. Like, one of those things can be unbelievable amounts of speed, and you could talk about a player who has, runs a 4.25 40, but if you can't do the other things that are more important about being a receiver, like getting open and catching the football, then, it really doesn't matter how fast they are. And I think that we can forget that and get either myopic about certain things or have certain biases when we can't keep track of what we're doing. And some of you probably multitask way better than I ever will, but I can promise you this: if you're, I was going to share my screen in a little bit and just show what I've changed my wide receiver section to, and I can actually share a little bit
Sure,
that now.
I'd love to.
And because I'm making some changes to that here. So let me see if I can show you this.
Yeah, while Matt's pulling it up, this is what I was talking about earlier, Matt. Like, I love the transparency, to your process, and you show people how much do you weight each component that you're grading. How much does route running matter? How much does separation matter? How much does catching? And you talk about how hard of a fix is it versus how easy is it to fix. So you could have something that's worth a lot of a player's grade, but it also could be one of the easier things to fix. So, I mean, it's great. No, I've never read anyone else that's really broken it down this way.
Well, one of the things that you're going to see is this is my new wide receiver checklist that I've created. And what you're going to see across, I used to do this in Access, which is now no longer supported by Microsoft. And my computer's old enough now that I just bought a new computer yesterday. So I realized that, I knew ahead of time that I was going to have to change things. But you can see that literally I have, let's see, roughly 220 lines worth of criteria that I'm going to be grading for wide receivers next year.
Wow.
And that doesn't even include things that I'm just going to be tracking, like, the types of targets that they catch in terms of how accurate the targets are, whether they're versus contact, whether they're versus tight coverage. But what I'm literally doing is looking at a whole bunch of different releases, from their stance to conceptual ideas about what they should be looking for pre-post snap, how they use their hands, how they use their feet, whether they display certain number of hands and footwork. I haven't worked out what I'm going to do in terms of the numbers there yet. I have some ideas, but how they separate, in terms of speed, all the different route things. And these are things that I've learned over the years, or I've learned but maybe haven't combined together in ways I wanted to, and using the help of folks like Drew Lieberman, who's a coach at Don Bosco Prep, one of the renowned high schools for high school football up north, who used to be the assistant wide receiver coach for Rutgers when Mohamed Sanu was there, and Leonte Carew and a bunch of other guys. And he works with a lot of guys like that and does a great podcast called The Sideline Hustle. I told Drew this. I literally watched all of the videos I could find of his and wrote them down on my blackboard in the back here. It's empty now but I've had it up there for literally 8-9 months. Like, that whole board was covered in what I just put down on that spreadsheet and organized. And that's for, that spreadsheet's going to be from 2021 moving forward. And I've done that with every position. So, I've been doing this for 15 years now. And and I have to write down what it is I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. So, we could watch film, and there's lots of things I could point out, and people go, wow, look at all the things that he points out that I didn't think of, because you do something else for a living. But it comes from spending day after day watching receiver after receiver using this process enough. And even still, I'm looking at it every day and making sure that I look at it so that I'm being consistent with the players. So, that's kind of an idea of what I get into, is that, and what I've shown there. I mean, Dwain knows. He's looking at my process there, and he's like, that's even bigger than what you had in the past, in terms of more stuff that you're looking at. So
yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, folks, you're getting all this for $21.95 over at mattwaldmanrsp.com. I guarantee you there is no other publication out there in fantasy sports that's going as in-depth as what Matt Waldman is giving you at the RSP. And there's also a portion of it that goes to a great charity. Matt, if you want to speak about that, which is just awesome on your part. It's just everything about the RSP is what fantasy football nerds like us, are here for.
Well, I appreciate that. And, it's, it shouldn't scare you that it's 1,194 pages. It sounds scary when you first hear that number, but it's really about 500 of it is really what you're going to read. The rest of it supporting work, including a glossary, so that you can see how I define everything. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty, I have some diehards who will write me questions and say, ask me very high end types of things that they want to know, and so that's part of it. But the RSP, it's also a bookmark, so it's very easy to navigate through, and you can use on an iPad, you can use on your desktop. Some people use their phone without any problem whatsoever. But the charity is Darkness to Light. It's an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse through training of individuals and a variety of civic organizations, whether it's police departments, fire departments, sporting sports leagues, schools, you name it. They've worked with Penn State. Ali Rossman is a guest speaker who has worked very much in conjunction with them, and they also train people to deal with sexual abuse when it comes to children who've suffered it, and know how to be able to handle it so that we don't have the repeat of what happened at Penn State or Michigan State in the future. So it's a great organization, and I've been given to it since I believe 2011 or 2012. I think it was 2012.
Wow. Dwayne, any other receivers you want to touch on?
No, let's get. Hey, Matt, is there one guy that you just feel like you really want to give a shout out? Maybe a lot of people are sleeping on, but it's somebody that, I know every year there's certain guys that endear themselves to you through this process. So if you've got any receivers like that you want to, hit for a few minutes, feel free.
And why is it Tristan Jackson from Syracuse? Just kidding.
Well, I've talked a lot about Quintez Cephas, so I'm going to keep him there. Just look him up and you'll know that I've talked about him a lot. But a guy that hasn't really been talked about a lot on any show that I've done, and I do like him a lot, even though he's not rated highly by the numbers, but he's in the early part of my third tier, and that's Devin Duvernay out of Texas.
Sure.
I like Devin Duvernay. I think that when you have a guy who has excellent hands, he has a better than advertised game against press coverage. I think he releases pretty well, even though a lot of teams will probably see him as a slot man. I think he's fast enough, obviously, to play in as a split end if needed, and put him in space as a flanker. And there's not much difference between him and Jalen Reagor in terms of my grades for them. And I like both of those guys a lot. He's not as dynamic as Reagor is after the catch in space, but he's more rugged. He's someone who I also think that if the team had a little imagination and they wanted to use him a little bit more like, say, a Danny Woodhead type of player who could also go deep and be split outside, he could be really dynamic as a backfield guy because he can run the ball. He was a former high school running back. Texas used him a little bit out of some sets where I thought he showed some good skill being able to read blocks and work between the tackles. And I just think that an imaginative outfit could use him both as an outside receiver and occasionally as a scat back and really create havoc for opposing defenses. So I hope an imaginative team gets him, because if they allow him to use him to his full breadth of expression, he could be something.
Let's move it over to the running back position now, where if you're drafting in Dynasty, everyone always needs a running back. So I think a lot of people are going to be focused on the 45th overall selection. This pick will come on Friday if they don't move out, and it's Tampa Bay. And Tampa just went out, if you haven't heard, and traded for some upstart tight end. So they've got Brady, they've got Gronk now, and they've got these just amazing wide receivers. What they don't have really is a running back. Now, I think they need someone who can obviously pass block. They're probably going to deploy some type of committee. Just racking my brain, I like a kid like Cam Akers. I think he would be a nice fit there. Other people are big on Edwards-Helaire out of LSU. Who is someone you think could fit into that system and they'll have the ability to run? And Dwayne, maybe you can jump in on this. The type of running scheme that Bruce Arians is known for, who is going to excel at that? Because that's really what running backs are all about in the NFL. That's what I gained from the RSP. You've got to be able, if you can run, gap, you're great at that. If you're a zone runner, you want to fit those molds, and then your careers either go this way or this way.
Dwayne, go ahead.
Well, I'll be interested to see what Arians chooses to do based on who he picks up. Because, I mean, in the past, with a guy like David Johnson, we saw him run a lot of power. We haven't seen as much. You saw some of that last year. I don't have the exact percentages in front of me, so I haven't seen the power and gap that we used to see. You saw a lot more zone blocking, which, Jay Moyer will say is part of what was Ronald Jones's problem, just because he didn't have, the ability to make those kind of decisions. And then his body actually, react to what his brain was seeing and synthesizing, and then actually be able to keep all that together. It was kind of like that was disjointed. So, I'm not sure what type of scheme they're going to run this next year. But I would love to hear, Matt, who you think, obviously they've got to be able to pass block. So maybe that's the starting place. We know it's somebody that Arians, he doesn't always use his runners, but when he had David Johnson, as a receiver, when he had David Johnson, he was definitely willing to use him. So if you see a guy that you think fits that, I think the scheme is still a little bit up in the air. But I do think Arians is a guy that has shown, from a running standpoint, and it does depend on your lineman, but he'll try to do what's going to work, for the player.
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense. And I look at this as when they added Gronkowski, it's very clear that they're giving the keys to this offense to Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be kind of like how Peyton Manning got the keys to Denver's offense and pretty much ran that offense, from a standpoint of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and, and go from there. And I think they're going to do the same with Brady, which means you're going to see a lot of stuff that I would think they did with, they did in New England. And moreover, I would say, I don't think they should trade O.J. Howard. I hear a lot of people like, oh, they're going to trade O.J. Howard. They need to free O.J. Howard. Well, O.J. Howard was locked up by Bruce Arians. I don't think he's going to get locked up by Tom Brady. And if he gets locked up by Tom Brady, it's because Rob Gronkowski comes into camp at 225, 235, somewhere around there, and isn't the 255, 260 pound guy that we saw. And they use him more as a move tight end, use him more as a slot receiver, and use him more as a red zone option and H-back, where they keep O.J. Howard at the line. Now, I expect Gronkowski probably to come in closer to the shape that we remember him to be as a blocker and all-around player. And what that means to me is, why would you want to get rid of O.J. Howard, who's an excellent blocker, when you have trouble along your offensive line? And you can have two tight ends and you can keep one in to help pass block with those tackles that have struggled. And they're probably going to draft a tackle number one, in the first round. And they're going to probably get a shot at one of the top 4 tackles in this draft class. So if they do that, they'll at least shore up one side, and they can use Howard to stay in for, Howard or Gronkowski really to stay in and help pass protect for the other. It also helps the run game. It's a very, and 2 tight ends and 3 tight end sets, if you add Cameron Braid into that, can be very difficult for teams to stop in the red zone, can be very difficult to stop in just terms of what the scheme for. And if you use 2 tight ends and you have those receivers on the outside like that, it's going to be hard for defenses to focus on any one player. And so, and it's going to help the run game. So for me, you look at this and it comes down to, what are these linemen best at? Do they have guys who can gap block effectively? Because really, just as zone blocking is really relying on how good the runner is with his footwork and decision making, gap blocking is dependent on how good and powerful and fast these linemen can be, how athletic they are at being able to move in that fashion, and how strong they are. And I just don't know if they have the line to run gap. If they do, then Cam Akers is the guy. I think he's an excellent gap runner with terrific receiving skills. He goes up and wins the ball. He's someone that they've trusted in the red zone. He's an excellent blocker who can get even better at it. I think he has a chance to be as good as any back in this class if you put him in a gap scheme, or if he learns a zone scheme eventually. So he's a guy that would be fun in that regard. And then when you look at Edwards-Helaire, certainly he's a fine player, and he's well suited to a zone scheme right now, catches the ball well. And what he's great at is route running. He catches it well, but he's not a great pass catcher. He's a good pass catcher who kind of short-armed, who, defenders can play tight, and he doesn't catch the ball well. in tight coverage compared to some of his peers. I would say if you just said who's good at catching the ball in tight coverage or contested situations, I'd put DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, and a couple other guys ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, as much hype as that he's getting as a receiver. But Edwards-Helaire is more of a Devonta Freeman type, and he could work well in that type of zone offense. And a lot of people say, well, he could be James White-like too. Yeah, he could do that as well. But he has to work on pass protection, and everybody says, well, he's going to be going out for passes a lot. Why does he need to block? Because a guy like Tom Brady is going to notice a blitzing linebacker or a different type of blitz look that he's going to have to call an audible and have the running back stay in and protect for him. And if Edwards-Helaire can't do that right off the bat, I don't necessarily think he's the greatest fit. In fact, what's interesting to me is that if they decide they're going to run more of a gap scheme, I would rather have Akers in that regard. If they're going to run more of a zone scheme, but they need to rely on a pass protector, maybe there are some other guys that they can get a little bit later, like a Zach Moss, who's not extremely fast, but he can take on pretty much anybody you need to as a pass protector. He's a decent receiver. A.J. Dillon is a guy that you won't think about as being a Bucs player, but if they want to pound the ball with that line and use the short controlled passing game, Dillon could be a really fun option for them who could wear out a team behind those two tight end sets. So, those are some players that nobody's talking about going to Tampa and may not wind up there, but they're interesting in that regard. Or an Eno Benjamin, who could probably do both gap or zone. He can give you kind of a Sean McCoy, I called him 98 proof Sean McCoy or something like that.
Yeah.
In terms of what he offers. And you could get him at a reasonable discount, and he could give you zone or gap skills, good receiving skills, make you miss, or a Joshua Kelly, get it much later as a zone guy who's also run gap style and has speed and quickness and receiving skill that's underrated. So I don't know if they're necessarily going to go running back as early as we think. And if they don't, I think they have enough guys to choose from in this class to work from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think come back at 76 in the third round and check somebody else out too. But that was exciting. I love that, man. That was damn good stuff.
Real quick on AJ Dillon, because he is a guy that he gets trashed a lot by people on Twitter, whether it's fantasy or whether it's draft coverage. He's a guy that a lot of people, I don't know if it's just they look at him as being the Boston College back and they say that he's the next Andre Williams or whatever just because he's a bigger guy. But tell folks a little bit about what you see, because he's one of the first names that popped out to me when I started really reading through the RSP and digging deeper last night into how you break players down into star or starter, committee caliber, and all these different areas. And the name I kept seeing, I was like, man, look at that acceleration. AJ Dillon is a starter caliber, and then I saw power. He's a star caliber, and so just tell folks a little bit about, AJ Dillon's game and, give us your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I didn't get it either, why people are kind of down on him. And the things I hear are, he's not as powerful as he should be for his size, or that he's not as agile as he should be, or he's had 866 carries and therefore he probably doesn't have much tread left on the tire. And, the tread left on the tire thing is a common myth. Looking back for years in my database, and looking at players who've had a lot of carries over their career in the college game, if they have a lot of carries and they don't have injuries, they tend to have a lot of carries in the pros and don't have injuries. It's one of those deals that I can't say it's a true correlation, but I can tell you that guys like Adrian Peterson, Ray Rice, Cedric Benson, Steven Jackson, I'm trying to think, Matt Forte, Ahmad Bradshaw. I'm trying to think. Those guys there. Just at Michael Turner. Those are all guys that had a ton of carries and all had long careers for running backs and produced at a high level. And so, AJ Dillon had 866 touches alone, and really didn't have a major injury. And when you watch him play, he's very nimble in terms of his footwork. He's not just a one move wonder type of guy. He can He can cut, pressure cut, jump cut. He can spin. He uses them wisely. He has good balance. Watching him, take hits. I've seen him take shots to his lower legs by linebackers from indirect angles and run through them like it's not a big deal early on before he's even generated momentum. He can catch. I mean, he's not going to be running Austin Eckler like routes, but he's going to be able to do, routes like wide routes and screen passes and swing routes and flat plays. And he does all that just fine. And I understand the Andre Williams fears because a lot of people really liked him. I didn't. But AJ Dillon and Andre Williams is no AJ Dillon. I mean, AJ Dillon is a for real player, and he deserves a comparison that's closer to Derrick Henry than people say, oh, that's kind of lazy because he's big. Or, I think he's somewhere between a James Conner and a Derrick Henry in terms of what he can do in terms of talent level. So to me, you give him the ball. He's a guy who's just ready to get the ball a lot and to be able to make things work. And I think that he's quick enough that if you need to use him in a shotgun offense, he can do that. And, he'd be better as a single back, but he could do the shotgun work.
I got to stop here. I saw AJ Dillon run for 242 and 3 touchdowns, averaging 7 yards a carry against Syracuse this year. I gotta open a beer here, and I can't relive this again. This kid can play football. I think sometimes, Matt, I get so frustrated when I see guys out there talking about, wow, this guy doesn't do this one thing so well. But sometimes it's like you got to take a step back and just say, this guy's a good football player. Like with Laviska Shenault, you just watch him play. Like, yeah, he got hurt here and there, but watch the damn kid play. These guys can put the pads on and do what you ask them to do. And that's what football is all about.
Yeah, well, I'll let Dwayne go in a minute here, but it's like this is, again, the argument for why if you write things down and try and look for what you're doing and keep track of them that way, you won't get your mind all jumbled up and start tying yourself in knots that you shouldn't about players that you end up overanalyzing and then downgrading in ways that you shouldn't have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you guys. Drake, I don't have a beer to pop, and I didn't see him run all over, which, he would have ran probably for 1,000 yards against North Texas, which, is where I went. So, Syracuse probably did better than North Texas would have done against Dillon. But I think the other thing I hear is just his game's all based, on power. And I just don't necessarily see the problem with that. I mean, some of the best backs in the league, their game is based on power. I mean, some backs base their game more on elusiveness. Some guys are blessed with both. I'm sure we'll talk about, a couple guys here in a minute, Matt, that you think, are the complete package. But to me, I don't see that as being a problem. And being an RSP reader for a long time, and, knowing how you go about this, I know power is actually, if I can't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it is the highest from a percentage component. It's probably the highest percentage, maybe outside of vision, for a runner in your grading process. So
it's certainly up there. And, nobody says, well, Pavarotti can only sing opera, so therefore he's not a great singer. I mean, it's just like, or Hank Williams only sings country music, so therefore he's not a great songwriter. I mean, it's just like, those are the types of things that people do. And they really just don't, that's why they're not paid to do this with the perspective. Maybe, they don't have that level of perspective, and that's why they're not doing it for a living. And that's okay, or they're just starting and they have things to learn. And we've all been there.
And what's wrong with being Mark Ingram? He's a great running back.
The Ravens didn't see anything wrong with it.
We're here talking fantasy football. I want guys that are going to score touchdowns. Dillon's going to score a lot of touchdowns in the NFL if he's in the right system, because who do you think is going to get the ball? Say he was on Tampa Bay and they're throwing a ball over the field. They got 58 pass interference calls in the end zone, and they put that ball down. Who do you think they're going to put it in the belly of? This big rookie, and he's going to score a ton of points.
Yeah, imagine AJ Dillon. Now, just think about this, because Chris Godwin might be the best receiver in football that nobody talks about. They'll talk about him as, everybody's talking about he was a good receiver, had a great year last year. No, I'm talking about he might be the best receiver in football. And there are a lot of people that might argue with that, but after last year and probably this coming year, it's going to become a much more likelihood that people are going, yeah, he's one of the top 5. Mike Evans has obviously already been talked about like that, and then you have OJ Howard and Rob Gronkowski. I mean, safeties are going to have nightmares against that. What's the box count going to look like with the threat of these guys stretching the field? And then you hand a ball off to AJ Dillon, with Tom Brady's play action game.
Right.
I mean,
You're running against light boxes all day. This guy's making one man miss and he's off to the races.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, I'll say this right now, and I know a lot of people, then they'll really get angry with me because I've always liked Peyton Barber as an underrated guy. But shoot, I mean, if they can run block really well, they might be able to put arrows in, for Ronald Jones to actually hit those creases the way he needs to, and he might be like the guy in the grocery store now, where they actually emptied. We have like an empty lines now, and at some point he can kind of run through there as fast as he can. or you've got a guy like Barber who can basically create something out of nothing. And when I say nothing, he often absolutely has nothing. I would be willing to bet that, that if they stuck with Peyton Barber, he would probably have a 1,200 yard season if they stay healthy in the way that it looks right now. And maybe he averages 3.9 or 4.1 whatever a carry, and it's not fantastic, but it'll be fascinating if they go somebody else.
He's going to the Redskins. Your buddy Peyton Barber.
Oh, is he really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay because they probably will need him. They will probably need him.
This is Darius Geis' season. Come on.
They will probably need him. Now, but the 57 Chevy's still there, right? In terms of
the 57 Chevy is still there. Yes,
okay, yes. Well then
you
got be fine.
You got Adrian Peterson, Bryce Love, Peyton Barber, Darius Geis. I think they signed like JD McKissick or something.
So basically, Peyton Barber will be the second back by the end of the year.
He'll be on a waiver wire show.
He is unkillable. That's fine. It'll be all right. So
Matt, hey, just about everywhere you go, everybody, and I'm going to say spoilers here, but I got to talk to you about this guy. It's like everybody has either Jonathan Taylor or DeAndre Swift at the top of their board, but you don't. And I know these guys are close, and I know rankings suck, but talk to people about who you have. I'm not even going to announce it. I'll let you announce it. Who do you have at the top of your board at runner, and just tell people a little bit why.
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State. I love him. I think he's absolutely terrific speed, great burst, someone who can win outside and inside. His feet, in terms of being able to, anticipate penetration, anticipate, traffic and work around and through traffic with terrific balance. It's all there. He can catch the ball reasonably well. He's a decent blocker. He protects the ball all right. He reminds me a lot of kind of like a higher end version of what Ray Rice was with the Baltimore Ravens in his peak. I think that he can be better than that. And I was a big fan of Ray Rice's game coming out of school. And I think there's even a little bit of LaDainian Tomlinson to his game in terms of his ability to cut and change direction and his ability to work to the outside and get downfield. I mean, he treated the Clemson defense like they were like, I don't even want to go there. I mean, I was going to say he treated the Clemson defense kind of like our governor's treating our populace right now in Georgia, but it might not. That might be worse. So he was. He's absolutely an excellent player who has to learn a little bit more patience, maybe on certain types of runs. But it's more of a judgment call with him than it is about he doesn't understand the scheme, and that's a big difference for him. It's more like, I think I'm fast enough to do this. I think I don't need to use as much nuance sometimes as I should. But there are plays where you see where he does it, just fine. He does it the way that you'd want to draw it up. So I think for him, it's more about seasoning. And people go, well, he shared time with Mike Weber, and Mike Weber didn't turn out to be much. And he shared time with Master Teague, and he's, and he wasn't really, his production. And Yeah, but when you watch actually what they do on the field, you have to understand that Ohio State's always going to be telling their recruits, for as long as they're a powerhouse team and have the same recruiting staff that most SEC teams do, they're going to be telling their high school recruits, look, man, you're going to play right away. We're going to find a place for you to play. You're going to have a role. Even if we have a Heisman caliber, threat in the backfield, we're going to run a split backfield because it saves that other guy. So, it gives you an opportunity to play and showcase your talents. And eventually you'll be the lead back if you play well enough. So, they do it at Alabama. They do it at Georgia. All those guys have put in, excellent NFL talents in recent years at that position. They do it at Ohio State too. The difference is that, Mike Weber, I didn't ever think was a very good, NFL prospect. But he had a role. And I think that Dobbins is an excellent NFL prospect. And I think that he's going to come in and play well right away and wind up being one of the best backs from this class.
And where we see him linked a lot in mock drafts, Miami, Pittsburgh, Atlanta a little bit, and at the end of the first round in Kansas City. Imagine, boy, if he gets put in there. Dwayne, where will my allegiances lie? What will happen to, my man crush, Damian Williams, if they add this kid?
If this kid goes to Kansas City, he'll be a first-round draft pick and redraft.
Yes.
We saw what happened with Darwin Thompson last year, and we love Darwin Thompson on this show. I know, Matt, you're a Darwin Thompson truther yourself, but that guy creeped into the 6th and 7th round, like late in draft season last year. I mean, we're talking like right out of the gate. If we have a season and we're drafting here in a few months, knock on wood, I hope that's happening. But man, this guy will be a first-round fantasy draft pick, even in redraft. We're not talking dynasty.
Yeah, and if he goes to Pittsburgh, and I want to see him do well. I like seeing these guys do well and get picked in good places. Man, if he gets picked by Pittsburgh, they can basically clear the slate of their depth chart that they want to. And I think that could be that would wind up being a fantastic get for them with that offensive line and with Roethlisberger back for another year, even if, whatever his condition is and how he's going to be, he will be a significant upgrade to what they had last year.
Anybody you don't like at running back, you look at and you kind of go like, I don't see it. I don't know why everyone's got him so high.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Can I guess who you're going to say?
You can guess.
Are you going to say somebody with my namesake?
Yes.
My last name?
Yes.
Why do you got to hate on my family?
First Booger and now Anthony.
Yeah. I like Booger. Okay. I don't have an issue with Booger. He's fun. As Matt Harmon said on my podcast, he likes to draw a lot of phallic symbols on the screen, and there's a place for that, but Anthony, he's like that kid in the class with the notebook, man. I don't know, but Anthony McFarland, he's really fast. You can put him in a gap scheme, and I think that he can be a role player for you. He might even develop into being a good gap scheme runner who can be productive. I think there's a good chance for that. He runs really hard, catches the ball all right as well too, but he's kind of like Bishop Sankey in that way where he's really athletic, really fast, but you kind of need directions once he gets into the hole. Like it's like there's open space there, and then he seems to slow down or try to make a cutback that you just don't know about. I've joked about him I was on the Dynasty Blueprint cast with Ryan McDowell and Matt Williamson this afternoon, and I said he's kind of like that guy that when you and your boys were all friends in their 20s and you were all dating, he was that guy that seemed to have everything together except his picker was off, and so there'd be someone interested in him that you think, wow, this could be it for him if they get together. But and they're about to go on, make plans, and they have a nice conversation. You even set him up to where he's going to hang out with her. And then you say, how'd it go? We had a really nice conversation. It was great. So are you guys going on a date? No, I'm having a date with this person. And that person's complete trouble, complete absolute trouble. That's McFarland in a hole, right? It's he gets to the edge of the hole and then it's what are you doing? Why are you trying to, I've seen him reverse field out of the crease, so he's a guy that I think I think he needs a lot of work. He might get there one day. He might even flash in a role, but he's kind of like Tywan Jones. Everybody loved Tywan Jones for his speed and his ability in the open field. And while people go, well, McFarland destroyed Ohio State, yeah, like on 2 runs, and then the rest of the time it was like he struggled. He was, so that people get too tied up in production, they get too tied up in speed. When it comes to the repeatable skills that put yourself in position to make good plays, I have real questions about him in that regard.
He showed up to the house and said, "What happened? Oh, I'm dating her sister now."
Yeah.
Let's move it over to quarterback.
And then he married the other sister after that.
Yeah. Talking with Matt Waldman. He is the author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Please head over to mattwaldmanrsp.com and sign up for the site, download the RSP, and dominate your Dynasty drafts. And if you're just a football fan, if you're not into Dynasty or rookie drafts or whatever, if you just love football and smart content, this is where you're going to get it. So we're always so pleased to have Matt give us a few minutes of his time. And everyone likes to start with quarterback. We're going to finish, I guess, with quarterback. And probably 4, maybe 5. We'll see if Hurts gets lumped in there. We'll go in the first round, I'm sure. So let's start kind of at that back end with Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts. And I think I can compare these two a little bit because I've heard you talk about them as guys, GMs will say, we missed on Mahomes, we missed on Lamar. This is how we're going to make up for it. Jalen Hurts excels off script. Jordan Love, a guy who's not overly accurate and can make a lot of mistakes, but boy, do they make some flashy plays.
Yeah, I actually like Jalen Hurts, even though he's ranked below Jordan Love. But I think Jalen Hurts has a chance in this league to develop into a decent starter. It's just going to take him a couple of years. And I think he'll be appropriately drafted, meaning probably 3rd round or later. And I actually think it'll probably be more 4th round or later that he'll be drafted. If he's drafted higher, I'll be surprised, but I'm not really into that whole guessing game with the draft. When I look at his grade and how I've seen him play, he looks like a developmental project who could be good. And why that is that when he plays on script or he understands the limits of what he does off script, he can be accurate. He can be accurate down the field. He has a nice arm. His movement and his ability to hang in the pocket is pretty good. I think it can get a little bit better, and they're not things that I think are insurmountable challenges for him to improve upon. He has a little bit of an issue with his back foot where the back foot isn't solid enough for him to be able to throw accurately on certain plays, especially when he makes a little bit of movement in the pocket, but I think that's also improvable. He gets invested too much in plays where it's like if the longer he buys time, the more he's like, I have to find an open guy. And even if I can't find an open guy, I have to throw a ball where someone's going to have a chance at it, regardless of who that is. And he won't throw the ball away. And that's a common issue with pretty much every quarterback who's coming out of college, is that the longer they keep a play alive, the more invested they are in it. And some guys break that habit, other guys don't. So Hurts, I think, is kind of a David Garrard type of player who 2 to 3 years from now could challenge for the starting job, could maybe even give you a Pro Bowl season with a good team around him, just like Garrard did, maybe take you to the playoffs. But he's a guy that, how much he builds on that depends on, kind of how quickly he can improve from year to year.
Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, I would even say better than Tyrod Taylor. Definitely better than Tyrod Taylor. I think Tyrod Taylor is, I think Hurts already is better in the pocket in terms of how he views the field than what Tyrod Taylor was coming out. And I think that Tyrod Taylor would be a low ceiling for him. It would be, I think he can surpass that ceiling.
Cool.
Yeah. Love is that guy that I've characterized as that guy who the GMs looked at Mahomes, they looked at Lamar Jackson, they looked at Deshaun Watson and just decided, you know what? Those guys were successful because they landed in offenses where the teams were like, we're going to build around them. We're going to scheme to them. We're going to work on their weak, we're going to do that and take away their weaknesses in a way that, they're going to get developed. And to me, that sounds much more like a front office guy who's never been down to his coaching staff other than when they lose to yell at them or call them up to their office to yell at them, and doesn't really understand what their coaching staffs do. And what their coaching staffs do is teach the game plan and teach them basically the offense. They don't teach them the things to get better at their craft because there's not enough time. That's what players do on their own. Go watch Tony Gonzalez and the top 100 players of all time talk on NFL Network about how he got better. And it wasn't because, the coaching staff drilled it into him. It was because he sought it out on his own and made the coaching staff or other players stay with him after practice to work on the things that he knew he needed to work on every day, and that's what the best players do. He said that's what you have to do to get there if you want to be great. And most fantasy players and fans are like, he'll get coached up in the league. They'll get coached up in the league. No, you don't get coached up in the league. You either coach yourself up or hire a coach to help you work on that. And you are basically dedicated to the point of enslavement, in terms of the way that you're going to do it. You're going to be slavishly devoted to this. Or you're one of those guys that everybody's like, well, they should have been great, but they keep making these dumb mistakes, or they can't, get over the hump. And that's most of the league, is guys who are good some weeks, bad other weeks, because they don't do what it takes to be great. When you look at Love, he's that guy that, those owners are going to look at and say, well, we missed on Mahomes, we missed on Watson, we missed on Jackson. And, that's okay, because we can find a guy like that, because we're going to put him in a good offense and those talents are going to shine. Because look at him throw that ball. It's like, I always joke that speed and arm velocity are like the cleavage in the NFL to NFL evaluators and media types. It's like they just can't stop looking at it to the point
Katy
that
Perry image you use in all your tweets.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a Katy Perry image of Ellen DeGeneres looking at her cleavage, like completely enthralled, because it's the whole joke of like, they lose all sorts of cognitive ability, for that briefest moment. And then they're biased towards this, like, well, yeah, sure, they can't do this, but did you see their speed? And it's just
Ryan Pace is having the same conversation like every day in the mirror about, we got Mitch Trubisky. Now we missed all these other guys.
Yeah, well, yeah. And that was an interesting article that they wrote about him in the Chicago Tribune, because it kind of does trace back to what he did with, kind of what they look for in with the Saints quarterbacks, but he didn't, somehow he saw Drew Brees and all of that. I don't know. But the thing that's interesting to me is you look at Jordan Love and he just makes a lot of mistakes over and over and over again that he doesn't even correct in the game. Like when you roll out to one side in the fourth quarter and decide to throw across the entire width of the field into double or triple coverage, and it's intercepted, and then the next series you do the exact same thing from the exact same location, or you throw a perfect pass on an out and the defender slips and the guy catches the ball, but there's a penalty called, and then you decide to throw the exact same throw again to the exact same receiver and coverage, and the coverage is able to anticipate it, cut it off, and have a pick six. Or you don't learn when you overinvest in plays and end up again trying to force the ball, won't throw the ball away. And these aren't plays that come like Jalen Hurts will do that in the fourth quarter. We'll do that like in the first 3 quarters of a game. He'll do it in the red zone occasionally in a game where it's like early on, but when the game gets tight, or it's the fourth quarter, he uses better judgment. There's just times where he thinks he can take a risk that maybe he shouldn't, but it's not going to kill the team. Jordan Love will absolutely kill his team over and over and over again, and have no conscience about it, and just do it again and again. And it's like, and bookended by, that's what he does, bookending basically some sweet throws here and there. And so the
shooter's
team
got to shoot, right?
Throw. Yeah. So he's just, to me, he needs a lot of work. And the idea of him being a first round guy, I just didn't get. I didn't ever get that. If he gets drafted in the 4th or 5th round, I would say, good job. That's where he should be. Maybe you can develop it in a year or two. You can kind of put him in a Josh Allen type of offense where it's like he doesn't have to be everything to the team, and maybe he can use his athletic ability to kind of to work his way in and be a pretty good quarterback and maybe get his way into that position. But if you're going to draft him in the first round, then you're an arrogant owner of an NFL team who just thinks that Patrick Mahomes grows on trees.
You know, somebody I love in this class, and not because I think he's ever going to be a starter, but I think he's going to just have a great long career as a backup, is Jake Fromm from Georgia. You know, being an Eagles fan, obviously we talk about the Eagles a lot on this show. I would love if you could get him later in the draft and develop him over time to back up a guy like Carson Wentz. I think that would be fantastic. You have a really smart guy, and he strikes me as a New England Patriots type quarterback who's just a kid. He's not going to blow you away with his athleticism, but he's going to put the ball where it needs to be. He's going to make some plays, you know, and he's not going to kill you.
Well, I'm going to have fun with this one because obviously I said in the beginning of this show, you know, you're talking Eagles to a Cowboys fan, and you've got this high school Steelers looking color to this AFC North fan. And so I'm going to say this, and I'll say in about 3 years, if the Philadelphia Eagles draft Jake Fromm, he might end up actually supplanting Carson Wentz, who can't stay healthy because he tries to play hero ball about, 5 times every game, well beyond that he should. And I'll explain that a little bit more because it sounds kind of like, and I'm kidding a little bit, but I'm kidding about, wanting that to happen. But I actually think it could happen. And the reason being is that I've never been really supremely high on Carson Wentz. I think the Eagles basically created an offense for him because when he was, West Coast quarterback, North Dakota State, he had no barometer for how to throw a deep ball and actually hit it accurately.
He still doesn't.
He still doesn't, as you know. His best deep ball is when he's scrambled around for 8 seconds and throws the ball over the defense, and there's a receiver waiting there like a center fielder.
They had to put him in the pistol and try to make everything quick for him with the multiple tight ends.
Exactly. And when you have those short drops like that and just can get rid of the ball fast, he's very good. And he's a tough guy. He's, he is a leader. He can play very productive football. He can be an excellent fantasy player, and he has been for 3 out of the past 4 years or 2 out of the past 4 years. He's been pretty good, or really good. But here's the thing: Jake Fromm can already do a lot of that stuff that they ask, Carson wants to do, other than that crazy deep ball stuff. But here's the thing: he could probably do the things that Carson Wentz does right now better than what Carson Wentz does. And so he could be a more efficient player. And people don't like Jake Fromm as a starter because they look at the weak arm. And one of the things I've talked about over and over again during this pre-draft period is the fact that he has a better arm than people realize. Number one, he's going to improve at it. Now, he's never going to have, Jacob Eason or Carson Wentz's or Matt Stafford's arm, not even remotely close. Even if Popeye's can of spinach were a real thing, he could probably eat like a can of spinach every day and still probably never have remotely the arm strength that any of these guys that I just talked about.
We don't have any receivers that can run anyway, so he'll fit right in.
There you go. So, but here's the thing: he when I tracked his game and I started charting his game, I started noticing that there were a number of throws that looked like he had good velocity on it, but they arrived late. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I just started seeking out other people who maybe, I saw an interview with Chris Sims on Roto World about, his throwing process. And he talked about being an all arm thrower because he was a baseball guy and how he's working on developing his legs so that he can, or developing his motion so that he's using his legs more. That's low hanging fruit for a quarterback. Now, if you were saying he had to correct his arm, how he uses his arm, then I'd be a little bit more suspect, a lot more suspect. But his legs, Drew Brees had to work on that. A number of guys had to work on that. And he's literally studying at the altar of Drew Brees now. He's pretty much said that to develop what he needs to do to get his legs as part of his motion. And so when he's been basically throwing mostly, upper body and doing this and still showing some decent velocity on a lot of throws, and he throws for distance just fine. Any throw you put air under it, he's got the same amount of range or better than Matt Ryan right now. And Matt Ryan was one of the most accurate deep throwers in the league. So on go routes and fade routes and deep crossers and play action, anything where the receiver runs under it, don't even worry about it. That's not even an issue. But it's those high velocity opposite field throws that we don't see Lamar Jackson or Deshaun Watson throw right now, but they're successful. But Fromm, I saw somewhere, I thought the velocity's there up to about 25 yards, but some of these throws they're arriving late. And usually when a ball arrives late, that means he doesn't have velocity. So what gives? One of the things that I saw was JT O'Sullivan's QB School, which is just an absolutely great YouTube channel that anybody who wants to learn about quarterbacking, I would highly recommend watching. O'Sullivan was a former NFL player for a number of teams in a number of years. And he reviewed Jake Fromm a couple of times. And one of the things that he caught that I was like, oh, that makes total sense, is that offensive coordinator James Coley, who's recently been fired by the Bulldogs, installed a lot of plays in his offense where the routes didn't match the drops. And now O'Sullivan didn't say this is exactly what's happening. He didn't say, that Coley put these in. But what he did say was, I would be extremely surprised if Jake Fromm is not, is using drops different than what's prescribed. That would be very weird and very rare. He said, and there's a lot of weird things going on with this offense in terms of scheme that just don't make a lot of sense to me. So he said he's more inclined to believe that it was Coley. And the fact that Coley was fired is probably, added validation to that. But what's happening is that Fromm's up, on routes that often require 3-step drops in the NFL, a lot of these power throwing high velocity targets, he's dropping 5 steps. He's often dropping 5 steps from shotgun to throw these routes. And a lot of times with these routes, you would just drop maybe 1 step and set up and fire. Of course, you're going to be late. Of course, the throw is going to be, going to show less velocity. You're throwing it from a longer distance and 2 to 3 steps later than what you're supposed to, based on what you would project for the NFL. And you're going to do that against LSU's man-to-man corners in the SEC championship game. Of course, he's going to look like he has a noodle arm. So to me, I look at that and I listen to Chris Sims say, on air, I've caught a lot. And one thing we can say about Chris Sims is that he has caught a lot of quarterbacks, whether it's quarterbacks as a backup in the NFL, whether it was his dad and having his friends come over and they're all playing catch in the yard or throwing the ball around. And he said, I was really surprised at how strong Jake Fromm's arm is. And he mentioned that and said that, and Fromm said, he talked about at length what he's doing to improve the arm strength and his mechanics. But I think he has enough of an arm now that he's kind of a weaker armed. He's kind of what Drew Brees was entering the league. And I think he'll get better. And I think, Kirk Cousins is another guy that he kind of reminds me of in terms of being more stationed in the pocket and not very mobile. But I think he's a higher end version of Kirk Cousins. And I think he'll develop into that. I think he can be a starter in this league. I actually think he could be a pretty good starter in this league, maybe even a surprisingly good starter in this league with a right offensive fit. I mean, if the Saints get him, I'll be smiling. If the Bears get him, as Mark Schofield and I said, Nick Foles, we saw what Nick Foles did in Jacksonville, and we saw what Mitchell Trubisky has done. Jake Fromm might be the starter at the end of the year on that team, and I wouldn't be surprised at all that he winds up a backup somewhere, works his way in within 2 to 3 years, and then maybe gets an opportunity for a guy like a Carson Wentz who just can't help but making the gutsiest plays you'll ever see, and then you won't see him again for 6 weeks, as a result of that. That Atlanta game, man, last year with Carson Wentz, after watching him, I was just like, that's just who he is. And you love him for it, but then you hate it as an Eagles fan because you're like, when's he going to be gone for another 8 to 10 weeks? Or how short is his career going to be? Let's hope he can make some of these heroic plays when we need it.
And so Nelson Aguilar can catch a pass on the sideline. We don't have to win that game.
That's John Gruden's problem now. So, but at least temporarily. But you could see a guy like Fromm come into an offense like the Eagles or the Colts and really play well. And he's so good off platform in terms of just flicking the ball like a third baseman that he was, that he's very good in that 15-yard range making these plays. And that's something that I've noticed, most people notice who really study the game, that it's rare for him to make the types of plays he does with that arm. He has real arm talent in terms of different slots and how to use that. And he can throw some balls that I've only seen. I've seen Russell Wilson roll to his right or left and throw some balls on the move into the red zone that are absolute dimes. And they're some of the best throws we've seen all year. And I saw Jake Fromm do that against Notre Dame. And I'm sitting here watching that, and I'm like, nobody's looking at this throw like it's the best thing ever. But I was losing my mind watching him make plays like that. And so I think there's a lot more to this kid than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's like he and Wilson and Mahomes. It's these baseball guys. If you could, you're picking a ball in the hole and you got to throw 3/4 arm sideways. So it's interesting. So cool. Dwayne, what do you got, my friend?
I have one last one. Just so Matt, you're the GM of the Redskins. You've got the second pick in the draft. Let's just say you're not going to trade. You've got Dwayne Haskins. I know you think Dwayne Haskins is okay, but is it something where if you're sitting there and, obviously the first pick's probably going to be Burrow, should the Redskins take a guy like Tua?
I honestly think Tua Tagovailoa is a top quarterback on my board. So yes, I think any team that really feels that like they need a quarterback, should take Tagovailoa. But Washington, I think really for them to get a bookend pass rusher like Chase Young opposite Montez Sweat, I think is a pretty nice combo. I think the offensive line is good enough when healthy, which is the big if. And when Trent Williams isn't angry with the organization, if I were GM, I think I would make sure that Trent Williams would be like, I would be wooing Trent Williams every single day. I would probably find out do I need to cut your yard? Do I need to find, what cookware does your family like? I would be wooing this guy until he wanted to stay. If I could, I would make up for all of that. If I had to change the logo to get him to stay, well, I would anyway. So that's another story.
The rumor is, the Dolphins could very easily come up. They've got the ammo to do it. But just when I look at the Redskins and I'm like, with what they saw, and they didn't get to see a ton of Haskins last year, but and that's kind of why I asked it. I know how much that you think of Tua, and it just, if you have a chance to get a quarterback like that, I agree. It'd be great to get the end. Heck, you could get a great corner, to pair with what you did with Sweat last year. Who knows? Maybe the better idea is to wait and then come back and get a guy like Fromm, in the third round to compete. With Haskins, I don't know. I
think honestly, what I would do is I'd get Young. I'd let Haskins get one more year and see if he can show that improvement. And then you go with a quarterback next year, because your base is still young enough that you can give Haskins one more shot. And I think that's probably the reasonable thing to do. Now, the one that I don't understand is Miami and Herbert. If Miami picks Herbert, that's the reason why. That's the reason why they're going to still be picking early for the next 2 to 3, 4, 5 years, because it's the same decision making of Herbert can be a good quarterback, but to me, he's Carson Wentz light. He's not even as good as Wentz, but he needs the same kind of let's put the offense around him like we did with Wentz. And even then you still have some issues. And I look at Tua and I just think, you're worried about a hip injury that everyone says is going to be okay. Maybe you got to worry about him in year 10 or year 11, which, you're going to pick a quarterback now that has a 50 or 60% chance of failing, and because of a guy that you're worried about in year 10. What is that? That's the stupidest logic I could ever imagine with it's basically saying, well, I'm at the bar, I'm at the singles bar, and there's a really attractive woman there who I really had a great conversation with, and she's successful, and we have really good ideas about a number of different things that are, and we get along well, and you don't want to ask her out again because you're worried about whether or not she's going to be appreciative of you on your 10th wedding anniversary. It's just, that's the kind of thinking that just drives me crazy. And I think that, I think the Dolphins are about to get duped once again.
I love it. I want to say that if you're at the top of the draft and it's tough to get there, and I know if you have to trade up into those spots, it's very difficult. So I think Detroit should take a look. because you only have Stafford. You can get out after next year. Go get the player. If you can get a guy like Tua, all before this year, he was the number one pick. That's all everyone talked about. Wait till next year with Tua. That's like next year if we're all sitting here, gentlemen, God willing, and we're like, yeah, but Trevor Lawrence, I don't know. He didn't have a good senior year, and he hurt his elbow, whatever. It's like, put the games on. Watch Tua. He's awesome. He delivers every time you need to see him play. So someone's going to get a great quarterback out there, and I
like Detroit.
I hope he's not in the NFC East. That's all.
I like the Detroit idea, because then, when Baker Mayfield plays the way I expect he's probably going to play this year, then the Browns can get Matthew Stafford, which would be an upgrade. And I think that with a good offensive line, with a great run game and that defense, and we might actually see something that, then we can talk about the Lions actually being the last team that hasn't won an NFL championship. But they could do it. The Browns could do it with the Lions quarterback. That would be kind of a lot of fun. Yeah. Too much maligned entities actually coming together to make something good. That's kind of my fever dream about that. But, you can tell it's getting late, I guess. I don't know.
There you go. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. Matt Waldman, author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. You see him over on Football Guys doing great stuff with the folks there. Sigmund Bloom and, Gene Bramall and the guys in the Audible. And I listen to that all the time when I'm out cutting my grass and going for walks. And you guys do great stuff, Matt, and reading the articles there. And go to mattwaldmanrsp.com, download the RSP, spend the $22. It's well over 1,000 pages of information that are going to make you a smarter football fan. And Matt, we can't thank you enough. And I know Dwain works for your site and contributes a little bit. So we're glad for everything you do for us here and putting us on the map as you helped us do a year ago. And we're not here without guys like you who've helped move this little show along.
Well, you guys done great work, and obviously I love having Dwain work with me. He does fantastic work with the podcast and the analysis that he delivers, and you can obviously find him also at Establish the Run. They've done great work there, as well as this podcast that obviously I see a lot of great guests on this that you guys have had, and you guys do a fantastic work. And if you are interested in the RSP, one thing that I haven't mentioned is that for $21.95, not only do you get that what Brian's been talking about, but you also get a post-draft edition,
right?
That gives you fantasy rankings that kind of give you sweet spots between where I view players and where ADP, the average draft position, views those players based on early dynasty drafts right after the NFL takes their draft. So I'm not just doing dynasty drafts like right now. I'm literally waiting till the last moment to calculate that stuff, so you can see where, like, if I had Nick Chubb rated over Saquon Barkley, I'm not telling you to take him number one overall. I'm going to help you find a way to steal him, or a Patrick Mahomes or a Lamar Jackson or an AJ Brown, for that matter. And then you get team fits.
That was a huge one.
Yeah. And, most people didn't like AJ Brown with the Titans.
No, everybody thought he was a slot receiver. And Matt, I remember last year I asked him, I was probably like July last year, Matt. We were talking before a show or something. And I was like, all right, one guy this year that has a chance to really, if a rookie receiver has a chance to just blow up, first guy, Matt said, he's like, it's AJ Brown. He's like, if there's a guy that has a chance to come on, and you even, I think, called it like kind of mid-season and just take off. You said kind of like what Odell Beckham Jr. did, his rookie year, you're like, it's going to be AJ Brown. And, you were right.
And he had a good year. Yeah. And he's
amazing.
Yeah.
But the post-draft's awesome because all the stuff we've been talking about, around scheme fits and this and that and the other, that's what I love about it, Matt, is now you come back and based on where the players landed, you actually now have all that context. And you can say, hey, I'm concerned because this guy's going to be running in his own scheme. He hasn't shown he's done that. I would have liked the gap fit a lot better, or it could be the opposite. So all this stuff people have kind of heard us hint around tonight and talk a little bit about scheme. I mean, you really bring that all full circle in the post-draft RSP, which is awesome.
Appreciate that. And you get a newsletter that comes out monthly, and I update my rankings from the past 3 years of rookie classes 3 times during that year from June through December. So you get a lot for $21.95. And what's funny is most fantasy players who haven't gotten the RSP before, usually after they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I actually really didn't get this for a couple of years. that I'm kicking myself. I literally get those emails like probably about 15, 20 times a year, or the I'm blown away, which I probably get about 60 or 70 times a year. I get the other one I get is, would you just sell the post draft separately from the pre-draft? And because they love the idea of everything the post draft gives them. And I say, be patient. You'll actually appreciate the pre-draft down the line, because when all those commentators are like, who would have known about this guy? We don't know anything about who he is, who came up from being an undrafted free agent. Nobody's talked about him. I'll at least have had something on him. Even if I didn't have him rate him highly, what I strive to do is accurately portray their game. So you'll be able to look back in the pre-draft, see all the work that's done on the guy, read about him, and go, yeah, I'm seeing that on the field. And I'm seeing the upside that Matt's saying. This is, if he's in this situation, he can be good. That looks like that's matching up. Let me take him on the waiver wire as a preemptive pick. And those are the types of picks that often help you win your leagues. And so I usually have guys who will also write me and say, you told me that you were never going to sell the post draft separately. I wasn't sure if I was going to keep buying it again, but then I started seeing like these players like that. And I'd read the pre-draft and I go, wow, this has a shelf life of like 3 to 5 years. I'm getting out of this pre-draft, and I appreciate that more. So I just wanted to let you know, I realize that I've come to see the light. So I just kind of wanted to add that in there.
When I do my couple dynasty drafts every year, and there's one that's going to start up next week because the draft is happening, a couple days from now. And all I do is I look at the RSP, the update, and I read through all your stuff, and then I text Dwain and go, hey, what do you think of this guy? But, I look at the RSP and it's great stuff. And I remember listening last year, I remember where I was pulling into a parking lot of a client I'm calling on, listening to you on, I don't know, I think you might have been on with Bob Harris, and talking about your love of Lamar Jackson. Nobody was talking about Lamar Jackson last year. Nobody. I don't care what any revisionist jack-off wants to say now. Matt Waldman was on him preseason when people are like, yeah, he could be a good backup in a 2 QB league, blah, blah, blah. Waldman's like, this guy's going to be a freaking star. He's going to kill it this year, and he did. So kudos to you for that.
I appreciate that, and it's just, again, you follow a process and you try and stick to who the players are. And, I have misses too. I mean, listen, Dante Pettis didn't follow up on what he needed to do. Hakeem Butler was my number one receiver, and he didn't do anything last year. Now, I tend to be more patient from year to year. I try to give these guys 1 to 3 years of time to develop, and we'll see what happens from that. But I appreciate that, but it's about the process and trying to be true to that, and continuing to learn and not just following the winds of what everybody else says.
There you go. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for the Fantasy Football Hustle. Thank you very much, Dwain McFarland down there in Texas. We hope you're safe. Matt Waldman, thank you. Thankful for giving us an hour and 37 minutes of just fantasy gold right here on the Fantasy Football Hustle. We'll be back next week, folks. The murderer's row of guests keeps on rolling. We'll be back with a post-draft edition of the Hustle. We'll find out where all these guys went, and then we can start talking about landing spots and all that good stuff. But until then, head over to MattWaldmanRSP.com, pick up the rookie scouting portfolio. And until then, folks, never get out hustled. We'll see you.